Don't look at the door. Whatever you do, don't look at the door right now. That's what I kept telling myself the afternoon my neighbour, Carol Hutchins, grabbed my arm in my own kitchen and said those 6 words I will never forget as long as I live. Edmund, your son-in-law is robbing you. I laughed. I actually laughed. Because what else do you do when a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher, a woman who used to bring my wife sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving, grabs you like she's trying to stop you from stepping in front of a train? I said, Carol, what in the world are you talking about? She didn't let go of my arm. Let me back up. My wife Loretta and I had been married 41 years when all of this happened. 41 years, when met at a block party in Raleigh, North Carolina, the summer of 1982. I was 26, recently home from the army, working at a parts warehouse and trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to be. She was 24. Elementary school music teacher wearing a yellow sundress that I can still see clear as day if I close my eyes. She had a laugh that started in her chest and came out like something you'd hear in church, big and unashamed. When Loretta laughed, strangers turned around and smiled without even knowing why. We built a life the slow, steady way. A house in Cary, North Carolina, nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a porch. I added on myself in 1998. We raised 1 daughter, Tamara, just the one. Loretta used to say, the Lord gave us the one because he knew she'd be more than enough. She wasn't wrong. Tamara was bright, stubborn, full of opinions about everything, and the most important thing I ever had a hand in making. She got her mother's laugh. She got my stubbornness. She grew up, went to NC State, got a degree in business administration, and at 28, she met a man named Derek Simmons at a work conference in Charlotte. Derek was polished. That's the word I always used for him. Pressed shirts, never wrinkle, firm handshake, looked you in the eye when he talked, knew the right things to say at the right time. He worked in commercial real estate financing, made decent money, or so he told us. He drove a BMW that was just new enough to impress you, but not so new that it seemed reckless. Loretta liked him right away. I was slower. Not because I disliked him exactly, it was more that I couldn't quite get a grip on him. Every time I thought I understood who Derek Simmons was, he'd shift just slightly, like a bar of soap in wet hands. But Tamara loved him, and Tamara's happiness was the thing I valued above most everything. So I kept my reservations quiet, walked my daughter down the aisle at First Baptist in May of 2017, and welcomed Derek into our family the way you do, fully, no half measures, because that's the only way it works. For 2 years, things were fine. They bought a townhouse in Durham. Derek's career seemed to be moving. Tamara was promoted at her company. They came for Sunday dinners. Derek would sit on my porch and talk football with me. Everything was fine. Then Loretta got sick. It started slow enough that neither of us recognized it for what it was. She was tired more than usual. Her appetite dropped off. She started having trouble sleeping, and Loretta had always been the kind of woman who was asleep before her head hit the pillow. By the fall of 2022, she was having headaches that didn't respond to anything she took. Her hands shook sometimes. Small things, each one on its own, barely worth a doctor's visit. Together, they added up to something that scared me in a way I couldn't name. Her doctor, a good woman named Dr. Patricia Osei over at WaitMed, ran blood work in November. Then again in January. She told us Loretta's numbers were unusual but not alarming. She adjusted some of her medications. She ordered a neurology referral. Meanwhile, Loretta kept getting worse. By March of 2023, she was sleeping 12 hours a day. She'd forget things mid-sentence. She'd start to tell me something and then stop and look at me with this expression I'd never seen on her face in 40 years, confused, a little afraid. That expression broke something in me every single time. I retired that spring. I'd been doing accounting work part-time for 2 small businesses in the area since leaving my full-time job in 2019, but I let all of it go. Loretta needed someone home. I was that someone. No question, no hesitation. Tamara came over often, 3-4 times a week some weeks. Derek came less, always with an excuse that sounded reasonable on its surface. Work trip, a closing he couldn't reschedule, a conference call that ran long. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was focused on my wife. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Derek's absence from our house was not negligence. It was strategy. I need to tell you about our finances, because this is where it starts to make sense. When I retired from the telecommunications company I'd worked at for 26 years, I did it right. I had a pension. I had a 401k that Loretta and I had been contributing to since the mid-90s. We had the house, paid off in 2015. We had a joint savings account, a separate CD account Loretta had been adding to since 2001, her rainy day fund, she called it. Altogether, not a fortune, but solid. The kind of solid that takes a lifetime of not spending money you don't have. I had a life insurance policy with Loretta as beneficiary. She had one as well, with me listed, that we'd taken out in 2004, $400,000. Derek knew about that policy. I know because Loretta told me she'd mentioned it to Tamara during a conversation about estate planning sometime in 2021. Families talk about these things, we didn't think anything of it. What I also didn't know was that around the same time Loretta started getting sick, Derek was in serious financial trouble. I found this out later, much later. His real estate financing work had dried up during the rate hikes in 2022. He had taken on a private invested debt, the kind that doesn't get reported and doesn't come with grace periods. He owed money he did not have. He had not told Tamara the full extent of it. He had not told anyone. What he had done instead was start visiting my home more often when I wasn't there. Carol Hutchins lives directly across the street from us. She has lived there for 18 years. She walks her little dog, a beagle named Biscuit, every morning at 7 and every evening around 5. She knows the rhythm of our street the way a conductor knows his orchestra. She knows which cars belong, which ones are just passing through, what's normal and what isn't. She had seen Derek's car in our driveway on a Tuesday afternoon in February when I was at a doctor's appointment with Loretta across town. She'd thought nothing of it. Then she saw it again on a Thursday when I mentioned to her over the fence that I was taking Loretta to a follow-up with the neurologist. Then again on a Monday. She hadn't wanted to say anything. She told me later she'd kept telling herself there was an innocent explanation. He was checking on his mother-in-law. He was dropping something off. He had a key because he was family. But then she saw him, through his car window one afternoon as he was leaving, counting something. Bills. A lot of them, folding them and putting them in his jacket pocket with the careful attention of someone who does not want to be seen. And something in Carol's chest went cold. She waited. She watched. She said nothing to me for 6 weeks while she tried to convince herself she was being paranoid, that it was none of her business, that families had arrangements she didn't know about. Then one morning in April, she saw him come out of my house while I was mowing the backyard, walk directly to his car, and leave without ever knocking on the back door to say hello. That afternoon she came over with a plate of oatmeal cookies and sat down on my kitchen table and told me everything she'd seen. And that is when she grabbed my arm. "Edmund, your son-in-law is robbing you." I sat with that for a long moment. My first instinct, I'll be honest with you, was anger at Carol. Not at Derek, at Carol, because it's easier to be angry at the messenger than to open the envelope, because Derek was my daughter's husband and my mind did not want to go where Carol was pointing it. I said, "I give Tamara money sometimes. She probably sent him to pick it up." Carol looked at me the way a woman looks at a man who is not quite ready to hear the truth yet. Patient. Sad. Already knowing. She said, "Edmund, how often do you give Tamara money?" "I don't know. Sometimes. She's my daughter." "Do you know how much?" I didn't answer. That night after Loretta was asleep, I went to our filing cabinet. I keep physical records of everything. Old habit from accounting. I pulled out our bank statements for the previous 8 months. I sat at the kitchen table under the overhead light, and I went through every line. The withdrawals didn't stand out at first because they weren't large. $200 here, $350 there, once $600. They were spaced out in a pattern that, if you weren't looking for it, just looked like ordinary household spending. Cash withdrawals from the ATM nearest our house. The same ATM every time. Except I hadn't made those withdrawals. My hands were not shaking when I figured it out. I want to be clear about that. My hands were steady. My chest was the thing that wasn't right. There was a pressure there I'd never felt before, a specific kind of pain that isn't quite grief, and isn't quite rage, and isn't quite fear, but has elements of all three. In 8 months, someone had taken $11,200 from our account. I closed the folder. I sat there in my kitchen. Outside, I could hear the sound of the neighborhood being quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. I thought about Loretta asleep down the hall, her breathing shallow the way it had been for months, her hands that trembled sometimes now when she held a cup. I thought about Derek Simmons counting bills in his car. I thought about the life insurance policy, and I stood up from that table a different man than I'd been when I sat down. I did not call Tamara. I want you to understand why. Not because I didn't trust my daughter, but because if I was wrong, I would have shattered something between them that couldn't be unshattered. And if I was right, I needed to be certain before I put her through what being certain was going to put her through. I called my brother Raymond instead. Raymond is 70, 2 years older than me, retired from the Raleigh Police Department after 30 years. He's not a detective anymore, but he knows people who are. I told him everything over the phone at 11:30 at night. He listened without interrupting. That's something Raymond has always been able to do. Listen without filling the silence with himself. When I finished, he said, "You touch anything? Move any records?" "No." "Good. Don't. I'm going to call someone in the morning." The someone he called was a private investigator named Clifton Walls, a former sheriff's deputy from Wake County who now ran a small firm out of Ghana. Raymond had worked cases with him years back. Clifton was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, moved slow and thought fast. He came to my house 2 days later on the pretense of helping me fix a leaky faucet, in case anyone was watching. He sat at my kitchen table where I'd sat with those bank statements, and he went through everything I showed him, the withdrawal history, the dates, the pattern. He looked up at me and said, "You have cameras anywhere in the house?" "A doorbell camera out front, nothing inside." "The doorbell camera, does it record or just alert?" "Records. 30-day rolling." He nodded slowly. "Let's go look at your footage." We found him on camera on 3 separate dates. Derek using a key, entering the house through the front door, staying between 20 and 40 minutes, leaving. On the clearest recording, you could see him walk past the camera on his way back to his car. He was carrying something. Couldn't tell what from the angle, but his jacket was sitting differently on his left side than it had been when he went in. Clifton looked at the screen for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "Edmund, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Does your wife have any jewelry? Anything valuable kept in the house besides the cash?" My stomach dropped. Loretta had a jewelry box in our bedroom. Her mother's diamond earrings, a strand of pearls I'd given her on our 20th anniversary, a gold bracelet from her sister, nothing worth a fortune individually. Together, maybe $10,000 if you were being generous. I went to the bedroom. Loretta was in the living room, watching television. I opened her jewelry box. The pearls were gone. The gold bracelet was gone. Her mother's earrings were still there. Either he hadn't found them, or he'd thought they were costume jewelry. They weren't. I stood in that bedroom, holding the empty spaces where my wife's things had been, and I did not cry. I am not a man who cries easily. But something happened in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It was the specific pain of realizing that someone had stood in the room where your wife sleeps, opened her most personal things, and taken pieces of her mother from her, and she hadn't even known. Because by then Loretta had days when she couldn't quite remember where she put something, and she'd assumed she'd misplaced the bracelet herself. She'd apologized to me for losing it. She'd been apologizing for months for something she had not done. I went back to Clifton and told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We're not going to confront him yet. We're going to build this properly." What Clifton did over the next 3 weeks was methodical in a way that I, with my accounting background, could appreciate. He pulled the ATM transaction records with my authorization and compared timestamps against the doorbell camera footage. He contacted a colleague who worked financial fraud cases and had him look at the withdrawal pattern. He found that Derek had also made one online transfer from our joint account, just under $1,000, moved to an account that had since been closed in January, buried in the middle of a busy month of transactions. Total amount taken, just over $14,000. Clifton also ran a background check on Derek and found what we'd had no way of knowing. 2 civil judgments from 2022, one from a private lender in Charlotte, one from a business partner who'd sued him over a collapsed real estate deal. Derek was drowning. Had been drowning for more than a year. And instead of telling his wife, instead of coming to me, I would have helped. Lord knows I would have helped. He had decided to take. We met with a detective at the Wake County Sheriff's Office. Raymond came with me. The detective, a younger woman named Sergeant Briggs, reviewed what Clifton had assembled and said it was enough to move forward. I asked her when. She said, "We'll need about a week to get the warrant. Then we'll move." I drove home that afternoon and sat on my porch. It was May, warm but not yet the brutal heat that North Carolina gets in July and August. The dogwoods in the front yard had just finished blooming. Loretta had planted those dogwoods in 2003. She'd watered them herself for years. They were 20 feet tall now, and she still called them her babies. I thought about what I was about to do to my daughter. Because Tamara didn't know, I was almost certain she didn't know. You spend a child's whole life learning the texture of who they are. And I knew my daughter. She was not capable of this. She was not. But what was coming was going to break something in her life that would take years to put back together, if it ever fully came back together. I didn't sleep much that week. They arrested Derek on a Wednesday morning at the title company in Durham where he worked. Tamara called me 40 minutes later, crying so hard I could barely understand her. I drove to her immediately. I told her everything. Sitting across from her at her kitchen table, the same way I'd sat across from Carol at mine 2 months earlier, I told her slowly, and I didn't skip anything, and I watched my daughter's face move through things no parent wants to see their child's face move through. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The jewelry, Dad, the bracelet." And I said, "I know, baby." And she said, "Grandma gave her that bracelet. I know." She looked out the window. He sat with me at Christmas and watched Mama look for that bracelet for 2 hours. He helped her look. I didn't say anything. She said it herself. Who does that? Derek was charged with felony larceny and financial exploitation of an elder adult, a specific charge under North Carolina law that carries serious weight. His attorney tried to argue that the transfers were informal loans Tamara had authorized. That argument collapsed when Tamara, without any pressure from anyone, provided a written statement to Sergeant Briggs confirming she had never authorized anything of the kind and had no knowledge of any of it. She filed for divorce 4 months later. Loretta's pearls and her mother's bracelet were recovered. Derek had sold them to a consignment shop in Apex. I drove to that shop with Tamara and we bought them back. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. Maybe she understood. Maybe she's seen that kind of transaction before. I put the bracelet back in Loretta's jewelry box on a Tuesday evening while she was resting. She found it the next morning. She came out of the bedroom holding it with both hands, looking at it the way you look at something you thought was gone forever. She said, "Edmund, I found it. I knew I hadn't lost it. I knew I hadn't." I said, "Of course you didn't, sweetheart. I told you she didn't know what I'd done to get it back." I never told her the full story. She didn't need to carry that. She'd been carrying enough. People sometimes ask me, since this became something people in my circle know about, they ask me if I'm angry. And I tell them the honest answer, which is yes, but not at the person you'd expect. I'm angry at myself for those first few minutes in my kitchen when Carol told me and my mind went immediately to defending him. For the way I said she probably sent him. For how fast I was to find an explanation that kept the world the way I wanted it to be. Because here is what I learned, sitting with those bank statements at 11:30 at night, that I want you to hold on to if you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar. The people who take from you are counting on exactly that. They are counting on your loyalty to the relationship to be stronger than your attention to the evidence. They are counting on you to make excuses so they don't have to. Every time your brain says there must be a good explanation, that is the thing they are banking on. Literally, in Derek's case. I am not telling you to distrust your family. I'm telling you to pay attention. Keep your records. Know your accounts. Not because everyone is a Derek, most people aren't, but because if there is ever a Derek in your life, the paperwork is going to be the thing that saves you. And the sooner you have it in front of you, the sooner you stop blaming yourself for things you didn't do. Loretta never lost that bracelet. She knew it. She'd been right about herself the entire time. It just took the rest of us a little longer to catch up to what she already knew. That's something I think about a lot. How she knew. How she kept insisting quietly, against her own confusion and her own fear, that she had not lost it. There was something in her that held on to the truth even when her body and her memory were making everything harder. That stubbornness I fell in love with in 1982. Still there. All the way through. If you're watching this and there's something nagging at you, some account you haven't looked at, some pattern you've been explaining away, some gut feeling you've been calling paranoia, I want you to hear this directly. You are not paranoid. You are not being dramatic. You are not a bad person for wondering. Write down what you've noticed. Check your statements. Call the person you trust most and say the thing out loud. Because the moment Carol Hutchins grabbed my arm was the moment that stopped what was happening in my house. Not the investigation, not the detective, not the warrant. The moment she decided that being wrong and embarrassed was less important than telling me the truth. Somebody in your life might need you to be Carol today. And if you're the one with the uneasy feeling, the one who keeps almost saying something, be Carol for yourself. That's all I've got for you. You know where to find me. I keep coming back to the moment Loretta walked out of that bedroom holding her mother's bracelet with both hands. She didn't know what it had taken to get it back. She just knew she hadn't lost it. She'd been right about herself the whole time, and nobody had believed her, including me. That's the part that stays with me the longest. Derek made a calculated decision. He looked at our lives, our savings, our trust, our routines, and he decided we were a resource. Not family, not people who had welcomed him and fed him and sat across from him at Christmas dinner. A resource to be drawn down slowly, carefully, in amounts small enough that we might never notice. And the reason he believed that would work wasn't because we were foolish, it was because we were decent. He was counting on our decency the way a thief counts on a dark street. That's how it works. The people who take from you almost never take all at once. They take in ways that let you explain it away. They take in ways that make you doubt yourself before you doubt them. And every time you say, there must be a good explanation, you are handing them one more month, one more withdrawal, one more piece of your wife's jewelry that she will spend the next year quietly blaming herself for losing. I was not a careless man. I kept records. I balanced accounts. And it still happened because the one thing I hadn't accounted for was the person with the key to my front door. Wisdom isn't just knowing how the world works in general. It's having the clarity to look at the specific situation in front of you without letting loyalty cloud your vision. Carol had that clarity. I had to borrow it from her. I'm not ashamed of that. But I've thought a lot about why she saw it before I did. And the answer is simple. She had no reason to protect the explanation. I had every reason to. What Derek did will follow him. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical way, but because actions have weight. $14,000 taken from an elderly couple, a wife's heirlooms pawned in a strip mall consignment shop, a daughter's marriage dismantled from the inside. That weight lands somewhere. It landed on him in a Wake County courtroom. It will land on him in every relationship he tries to build afterward, because a man who is capable of that on his best behavior will eventually show that again. And Tamara, my daughter, had to sit at her own kitchen table and reconstruct 2 years of her marriage with new information. She had to ask herself what was real and what wasn't. That took a kind of strength I don't think I could have found at her age. She didn't fall apart. She cried, she grieved, and then she stood back up and she told the truth to the detective when the truth was hard to tell. That's not something that happens by accident. That's something built over years, quietly, in small choices. I'd like to think her mother and I had something to do with that. What I know for certain is this. The thing that saved us was not luck. It was a neighbor who decided that being uncomfortable for 5 minutes was worth more than staying quiet. It was records kept in a filing cabinet that nobody thought mattered. It was a phone call to my brother at 11:30 at night when I could have just gone to bed and told myself I was probably wrong. Pay attention to what you notice. Do the uncomfortable thing. Stay in the room with the hard truth long enough to actually look at it. That's the only version of the story that ends the way ours did.